After 30 years of separate finances and sleeping in different rooms, a husband diagnosed with a terminal illness decided to leave his entire $500,000 life savings to his biological sister. His wife only smiled faintly, a mysterious expression on her face. Unexpectedly, what happened the next morning left everyone stunned. Welcome to the Times Golden Years Wellness Times channel. Robert Bob Miller collapsed right at his desk, his eyes glued to the red and green stock market indicators dancing across his dual computer screens. The pain shot up from his lower right abdomen, sharp, merciless, and brutal, as if someone were twisting a hunting knife deep into his internal organs. Before darkness completely swallowed his vision, he only had time to hear his ceramic coffee mug shatter against the hardwood floor and the frantic shouts of the building's security guards. When Bob regained consciousness, the harsh smell of antiseptic assaulted his nose, sharp and chillingly sterile. The blinding white light from the fluorescent ceiling fixtures forced him to squint for a long time before he could figure out where he was. It was City General Hospital. He lay alone in a hospital bed, surrounded only by the rhythmic, monotonous, and soulless beeping of medical monitors. There was no one beside him, no wife, no children, not a single relative. A doctor in his mid-50s walked in, holding a thick medical tablet. He looked at Bob over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes revealing the familiar sympathy of medical professionals about to deliver bad news. The doctor pulled up a chair next to the bed, his voice steady, though every word felt like a nail being driven into the listener's ears. He introduced himself as Dr. Harrison, the head of oncology. Doctor. Harrison asked if the patient had any family members present. Bob shook his head, his voice hoarse, stating he could handle it himself. He told the doctor to give it to him straight. At his age, he had weathered every storm. Nothing could scare him anymore. Dr. Harrison sighed and pulled up a scan on the monitor. He pointed to a cloudy mass, the size of a fist, taking up almost the entirety of the patient's liver. He concluded it was hepatocellular carcinoma. Worse still, the tumor was in its final stage and had begun to metastasize to his lungs. Bob listened as if struck by lightning. His ears rang. Forcing a laugh, he asked if there had been a mix-up. He argued that he was only 65, maintained a strict organic diet, walked 3 miles in the local park every morning, and never touched alcohol or cigarettes. How could he have cancer? He stubbornly demanded the doctor recheck the files, insisting they must have him confused with another Robert Miller. Dr. Harrison looked at him with deep compassion, but remained firm. He explained that biopsy results do not lie. The cause could have been a silent hepatitis infection from his youth that went unscreened, combined with years of chronic stress. The disease had progressed silently. By the time it caused the excruciating pain he felt today, it was already in its terminal stage. Bob asked how long he had left. The doctor hesitated slightly before saying, "About 6 months. If he underwent aggressive chemotherapy and palliative radiation, it might buy him a little more time, but his quality of life would drastically decline. If he chose no intervention, it would likely be 3 to 4 months at most. 6 months. Bob's entire life of striving, penny pinching, and hoarding every single cent was now appraised at 6 months of a frail, lingering existence. He sat frozen, his gaunt hands gripping the crisp white hospital sheets. In his mind, he didn't picture his wife or the luxury vacations he had never dared to take. The first and only thing that materialized in his mind was his blue Chase Bank passbook containing $500,000. That was the money he had amassed by depriving himself for the past 30 years. From his days as a senior accountant, taking on freelance tax prep and bringing ledgers home to work late into the night, he had never dared to buy a dress shirt that cost over $50. He had never stepped foot in a fine dining restaurant. All of it was just to watch the numbers in that account grow day by day. It was his blood, his sweat, his only source of security in a world he viewed as deceptive and ungrateful. Now that he was dying, what was the point of all that money if he couldn't take it to the afterlife? A vague but intense fear crept into his heart. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing his money. He was terrified that his hard-earned cash would fall into someone else's hands, especially Carol's. Thinking of Carol, his wife, a bitter and defensive feeling washed over him. For 30 years, Outsiders looking at their marriage thought it was peaceful, but only the insiders knew the bone-chilling coldness within that house. They lived strictly by a separate finances rule, or as kids call it today, going Dutch on life. They split the grocery bills 50/50. They split the electric bill. If a light bulb blew out, they split the cost of the new bulb. She nickel and dimed him over every single onion and head of lettuce. So why on earth should he leave this massive fortune for her to enjoy? Bob walked out of the doctor's office like a soulless corpse. The hospital corridors were packed with people, but the sounds of crying and calling out just made his head feel like it was going to explode. He dragged his feet out of the hospital entrance. The fading afternoon sun reflecting off the glass high-rises made him dizzy. He ordered an Uber and told the driver to take him to Centennial Park. He needed a quiet place to calculate his final chess move in life. Sitting on a park bench, watching seniors enthusiastically practicing Tai Chi, Bob's heart twisted. They were his age. Why were they so healthy and joyful, while he carried a death sentence? The breeze blowing off the park lake was cool, but he only felt a freezing chill down his spine. He pulled out his phone. The screen showed several missed calls. Not from his wife. She would never call him at this hour. They were from real estate brokers pitching investment properties. He scrolled through his contacts, his trembling finger stopping on the name Susan, sister. Susan was his only sibling. Though she was impulsive, running a boutique with business that fluctuated between boom and bust, she was his flesh and blood. She carried the Miller family name, whereas Carol, at the end of the day, was just a stranger with a different maiden name. Bob took a deep breath, suppressing the dull ache in his right side, and pressed call. The other line picked up immediately. Susan's loud voice boomed through the speaker, sounding cheerful and carefree, a stark contrast to his dark mood. "Hey, big brother, what's the occasion? You calling me during business hours? Did you hit the jackpot and finally remember your poor little sister?" Her sharp, dramatic voice made Bob feel annoyed but also slightly comforted. She was always like this. The moment she opened her mouth, she complained about being broke, even though she lived in a nice house and lacked nothing. But at least she spoke to him with a hint of family affection, unlike his wife at home, who only opened her mouth to discuss debts and bill splitting. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his tone as level as possible so he wouldn't break down. He told Susan to find a quiet place to talk, because he had something crucial to tell her. Hearing the unusual gravity in her brother's voice, Susan got nervous. He heard her yelling at her store employees to watch the register, followed by hurried footsteps into a quiet back room. "Okay, I'm listening. What's so serious? Did you and Carol get into a fight? Or did someone scam you out of your money?" Bob smiled bitterly. In his sister's eyes, did his life only revolve around those two things? He told her they hadn't fought, and he wasn't scammed. He told her he was dying. The other end went dead silent. The pause lasted so long he thought she had dropped the phone in shock. Then Susan shrieked, asking what kind of nonsense he was talking about. How could he be dying out of the blue? Bob briefly recounted the hospital visit, the malignant tumor, the short 6 months he had left. He spoke very slowly, word by word, as if forcing himself to accept this cruel reality. Susan burst into loud sobs over the phone. Her crying softened his heart. Blood truly was thicker than water. When he was sick, she was probably the only one who would genuinely shed a tear for him. He waited for her crying to subside before getting to the main point, the issue he had been agonizing over since leaving the clinic. "Susan, stop crying. Crying won't solve anything. Right now, I need you to do something for me. This is extremely important. It involves my entire life's savings. You have to swear you won't tell anyone, especially your sister-in-law." Susan sniffled, her voice still choked but calmer. She told him to just say it. Siblings might have their own lives, but in life and death, they stick together. Bob looked around the park cautiously, ensuring no one was sitting nearby, before lowering his voice. "I have a savings account with $500,000. The number made Susan stop crying instantly. He could hear her sharp gasp of disbelief through the cellular waves. "Oh my God, Bob, where did you get that kind of money? I thought you guys lived paycheck to paycheck on your pensions." Bob cut her off. He explained it was from side gigs day trading stocks, and compound interest over the last 30 years. Back in the day, he skipped lunch, wore the same pair of scuffed dress shoes for 3 years, and drove a beat-up 1998 Honda Accord for 15 years without upgrading, all to amass this sum. He emphasized that Carol had absolutely no idea this money existed. She only knew about his base pension. "I want to leave all this money to you," Bob stated decisively. Susan stammered, asking if her brother was joking. She pointed out that Carol was his wife. Legally, she was entitled to it. Why give it all to her? Hearing her mention Carol made Bob's blood boil. He snapped, telling her not to mention that woman. "You don't know the half of it. She's lived with me for 30 years, but acts like a total stranger. We split the mortgage 50 over 50. We split the groceries 50 over 50. If I get sick, she buys me cold medicine and literally holds out her hand for the receipt reimbursement. She is completely heartless and calculates every single dime. If she knew I had this money, she'd drain it all and run off with some boy toy, or blow it on those stupid MLM pyramid schemes she joins. I refuse to accept that. This is my blood, sweat, and tears. I'd rather give it to my biological sister than let an outsider enjoy it." He poured out a tirade of resentments he had bottled up for decades. The cold dinners, the utility bills slammed onto the table as a warning. The times he wanted to buy a new flat-screen TV, and his wife told him, "You're the one watching it. You pay for it." Their marriage had been clinically dead for years, maintaining a mere shell out of habit and pride. Hearing her brother's grievances, Susan was persuaded. She never really liked Carol anyway. Sister-in-law and sister dynamics were always fraught with fake smiles. Hearing this made her detest Carol even more. She told Bob to rest easy. If he trusted her, she would guard the money for him. She promised to take perfect care of him in his final days, ensuring he had the best medication. Bob instructed his sister to prepare the paperwork. In a few days, when he felt a bit stronger, they would go to a notary public to set up a legal transfer or a will. It had to be airtight and legal, so Carol couldn't contest it later. He specifically warned her to act completely normal around Carol. Hanging up, Bob let out a massive sigh of relief, as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off him. At least his assets were safe. He sat a while longer until the sun completely disappeared. As the evening chill set in, he stood up and hailed a ride home. Back to the place he called a house, which was essentially just a boarding house for 2 aging, lonely roommates. By the time Bob got home, it was pitch dark. The modest suburban ranch house sat quietly at the end of a cul-de-sac. The front door squeaked as he pushed it open. His old Honda sat in the driveway next to a few struggling potted plants Carol tended to. The kitchen lights were on, and the smell of pot roast and mashed potatoes wafted through the air. In a normal home, a family would be gathered around, filled with laughter and chatter, but in his house, there was only the dry, hollow clatter of a knife against a cutting board, signaling another dull evening. Bob walked in and swapped his worn leather shoes for old house slippers. Carol was busy setting the dining table. She was nearing 60 herself, her hair peppered with gray, her frame thin but quick-moving. Seeing her husband return, she didn't look up, just dropping a brief sentence, "You're back. Wash your hands and eat." "I cooked early today. I have a neighborhood HOA meeting later." Bob didn't reply. He silently walked into the bathroom to wash his face. The cold tap water made him slightly more alert, but the dull ache in his liver flared up, a constant reminder of the approaching reaper. Looking at his hollow, aged face in the mirror, he pitied himself. A lifetime of labor, and for what? The dinner was simple: a plate of pot roast, green beans, some mashed potatoes, and gravy. The couple sat opposite each other, each taking a corner of the table, eating in silence. Neither spoke. The clinking of forks against ceramic plates was the only sound in the suffocating room. Bob brought a piece of beef to his mouth. It was slightly salty, just the way he liked it, but today he couldn't swallow it. His throat felt bitter. He looked at Carol. She ate very slowly, chewing thoroughly, staring intently at her plate, as if counting her peas. "Where did you go so late today? I couldn't reach you." Carol suddenly spoke up, her eyes still not meeting his. Bob flinched, but maintained a calm facade. He lied, saying he had stayed at the accounting firm to finish some quarterly tax reports and his phone battery died. He lied without blinking. 30 years of marriage had trained him perfectly in this skill. "Is that so?" Carol replied indifferently. She set her fork down, pulled a folded piece of paper from her cardigan pocket, and slid it across the table toward him. "This is the property tax and insurance statement for the rental house in the suburbs. The total is $820 for the month. Your half is $410. Venmo or Zelle it to me tonight, please. Tomorrow is the deadline, and I don't want to pay late fees." Bob looked at the paper, then at his wife. His blood boiled, rushing to his brain. He had just received a death sentence. He had just dragged himself back from the gates of hell, and the very first thing his wife said to him at dinner was about a debt. Not a single word of inquiry about whether he was tired, or why he looked so pale. Just money, money, money. He threw his fork down onto the table. "Can't you let me finish a meal in peace? Always about money. I'm not dead yet. You don't have to worry about me defaulting." Carol looked up at him, her gaze sharp and entirely unbothered. She calmly said, "Don't lose your temper, Bob. Business is business. We agreed when we got married. Financial independence, 50 over 50, nobody relies on anyone. Have you forgotten? Asterisk. You times were the one who established that rule. The bill is due, and I'm reminding you of your responsibility. If you transfer it early, I don't have to front the cash. It's not like I have money to burn." Bob choked on his words. It was true. Years ago, he had invented this bizarre rule. Back then, he thought since he was the primary breadwinner, he was afraid his wife would spend recklessly, or her family would use him as an ATM. He wanted to hoard his money to get rich, and have the final say in the house. Who would have thought that this rule would turn into a noose tightening around his neck, turning their home into a marketplace and husband and wife into cold business partners? "I know," he snapped, pulling out his wallet, slamming a debit card onto the table. "I'll transfer it later. You act like I'm a freeloader. It's $410. You're acting like it's $4 million. Whether it's 400 or 4 million, it's still money." Carol picked up the card and slid it right back to him, her voice as monotonous as a machine. "Do the transfer yourself on your phone. I am not holding your card. God forbid you lose $1 and accuse me of stealing it. I don't need that headache. I'll just wait for the bank notification." Bob snatched the card back, his hands shaking with anger. She was actually guarding herself against him, afraid he'd accuse her of theft. My God, a married couple acting like common thieves. He sneered, his resolve to leave everything to Susan, cementing further. Asterisk. If you're going to be this calculating, don't blame me for being ruthless. Asterisk. He stood up, leaving his plate half full. "I'm full. You eat. If you're not going to eat it, put it in Tupperware. Don't waste food," Carol called after him as he headed for his bedroom. Bob slammed the door shut, severing his world from hers. His room was about 150 square feet, containing a twin bed, a desk, and a heavy metal filing cabinet. Carol slept in the master bedroom next door. They had been sleeping separately for 10 years. The excuse was that he snored and kept her awake, and she woke up too early and disturbed his sleep. But the truth was, there was zero emotional connection left to warrant sharing a bed. Bob collapsed onto his mattress, the liver pain flaring up again. He curled into a fetal position, sweating cold bullets. In the darkness, he could hear the clatter of Carol loading the dishwasher, the water running. She was going about her life normally, completely unbothered. She had no idea that the husband lying in this room was just a breathing corpse, counting down the days to his death. And she had no idea she was about to completely lose out on a fortune she was legally entitled to half of. Thinking of this, Bob felt a bizarre, triumphant satisfaction. It was the sweet, bitter revenge he was exacting on this failed marriage. He reached into his nightstand for a bottle of ibuprofen, dry swallowing 2 pills, and closed his eyes, waiting for sleep to bring the inevitable nightmares. In his feverish, half-awake state, memories from 30 years ago flooded his mind like a slow-motion, black and white film, suffocating his already weakened heart. Back then, he was an ambitious young junior accountant, and Carol was a gentle, traditional high school teacher. They met through a mutual friend. Their love blossomed over dates in the local park, riding together in his old beat-up car to get ice cream downtown. Their wedding was simple but warm. They thought the happiness would last forever. But the harsh reality of bills and mortgages quickly blew away the early romance. Bob remembered the fateful day vividly, the day the invisible wall was officially built between them. It was a winter evening in 1995, about 3 months after their wedding. Bob had just brought home his paycheck and happily handed it to his wife to manage the household. But just a few days later, he discovered Carol had secretly wired half of that money to her mother back in Ohio to fix a leaking roof. Bob was furious. Not because he regretted helping his mother-in-law, but because Carol hadn't discussed it with him at all. He felt bypassed, disrespected. He feared that if his wife managed their finances like this, all his hard work would funnel straight to his in-laws. A massive, fiery argument erupted. Carol cried, calling him a stingy miser for calculating pennies with her own mother. Bob stubbornly defended his stance. The money he earned had to be strictly managed. In the heat of his anger, he spat out the words that became the death sentence for their marriage. Asterisk from now on, we keep our money separate. Household bills get split down the middle. I won't touch your money. And don't you ever dare touch mine. That's the fairest way, so we don't have to suspect each other. Asterisk, Carol had stared at him, stunned, her eyes wide in disbelief, as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. Then she wiped her tears, lifted her chin, and replied with absolute pride. Asterisk. Fine. You want to go Dutch? We'll go Dutch. I have a salary. I can support myself. I don't need your charity. Asterisk. And so, the roommate phase began. They bought an accounting ledger and divided it into 2 columns. The left column was joint expenses, groceries, utilities, mortgage. The right column was personal expenses. At the end of the month, they tallied it up and split it. Even the refrigerator was partitioned. The top shelves were his, the bottom shelves were hers. If he bought beer, it went on his shelf. If she bought yogurt, it went on hers. If someone ate the other's food, they had to pay them back. At first, both felt liberated by the financial freedom. Bob was thrilled he could hoard his cash and invest it to make profits. Carol was proud she never had to hold her hand out to her husband. But gradually, that fairness mutated into a cold, ruthless transaction. Family dinners turned into shareholder meetings over profit divisions. Marital affection eroded alongside the lifeless numbers in the ledger. Bob rolled over on his bed. A sharp pain snapped him back to the present. He looked at the wall clock. 3 a.m. Outside, the wind howled against the window panes, sounding like the heavy sighs of the night. The empty room was as cold as his soul. He thought back to the argument earlier that evening. Over a measly $410 mortgage payment, she had spoken to him like a debt collector. He wondered, if he had dropped dead at the dining table today, would she have shed a single tear? Or would her first instinct be to rifle through his wallet to take the $410 he owed her? The thought made him shudder. Asterisk, no, he couldn't let her get her way. He had to act immediately. Asterisk, 6 months was too short. He couldn't procrastinate. The $500,000 had to be safely transferred to Susan before he closed his eyes for good. The next morning, Bob woke up earlier than usual. He tried to keep his face as neutral as possible when he walked out of his room. Carol was already up, raking leaves in the front yard, the sound of the rake scraping the driveway echoing dully. Seeing him, she paused and asked her usual, emotionless question. What do you want for breakfast? Bagel or eggs? Neither. I'll grab something on the way, Bob replied curtly, walking to his car. Are you eating dinner at home tonight? Let me know, so I can buy groceries. Don't make me cook, and leave it sitting there like yesterday. It's a waste of money, Carol called after him, her voice still dripping with financial pragmatism. Yes, I'll be home. Bob suppressed a sigh, started the engine, and drove off. He didn't go to work immediately. Instead, he stopped at a familiar local diner. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and sat observing the morning rush hour traffic. Everyone looked rushed, burdened. How many of them were carrying dark secrets and unspeakable pain like him? He texted Susan, asterisk, take the afternoon off. Meet me at the Main Street Diner at 2 p.m. I'm bringing the documents and the savings book. Come alone. Do not tell anyone, not even your husband. Asterisk. Sending the text, Bob felt his heart rate spike. The asset hiding plan had officially commenced. He felt like a secret agent executing a covert mission inside his own home. A bitter smile touched his lips. What a tragedy to call this a family. After leaving the diner, Bob didn't head to his accounting firm. He U-turned and drove back to his house mid-morning. By this time, Carol was already at the high school teaching. The house was completely empty. It was the safest time to retrieve the bank book from its hiding spot. He parked in the driveway, locked the front door behind him, and looked around nervously like a burglar breaking into his own property. The silence of the house made the thumping of his heart in his chest incredibly loud. He walked quickly into his bedroom, shut the door tight, and drew the blinds. In the corner of the room, the heavy, fireproof metal filing cabinet stood like a loyal sentry. This was his untouchable private world. The key to the cabinet was always on his keychain, securely clipped to his belt loop. He even slept with it nearby. With trembling hands, Bob inserted the key. A dry Times click Times echoed. The heavy drawer pulled open, hitting him with the smell of old paper and mildew. Inside were stacks of tax records, old W-2s, faded certificates, and memorabilia from decades past. But his most prized possession wasn't in plain sight. Bob crouched down, reached deep into the bottom of the drawer, and lifted a piece of false cardboard lining. Underneath was a rusted vintage tin cigar box. He pulled the box out, set it on his bed, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside was the blue Chase Bank passbook, meticulously wrapped in a waterproof Ziploc bag. He picked it up and flipped the pages. The balance of $500,000 was printed clearly in black ink against the white paper. $500,000. He caressed the number as if it were his own flesh and blood child. To attain it, he had lived a double life for 30 years. By day, he was a strict, honest corporate accountant, but after hours, he took on endless side hustles. He did bookkeeping for dozens of small businesses deep into the night. He stared at stock tickers until his eyes burned. He day traded crypto and gold. He remembered the lean years when his coworkers went to happy hour on Fridays, and he always made excuses to save $20. When his dress shirts frayed at the collar, he didn't throw them out. He sewed them up to keep wearing them. When his shoes cracked, he bought Gorilla Glue to fix the soles. He turned himself into a massive cheapskate in everyone's eyes, including his wife's. Carol always thought he only had his modest 401k and standard pension, plus maybe a few bucks from minor tax prep gigs. She often mocked him for being a penny pincher who counted every single grain of rice. But little did she know, it was exactly that penny pinching that built this empire. He hid it from her, not because he didn't trust her, but because he was terrified. Terrified of her generosity and soft heart. Carol was a good person, he admitted that. But she was too trusting and terrible at holding on to money. If her relatives had an emergency, she'd empty her pockets. If her friends pitched a business opportunity, she was easily swayed. If she knew he had $500,000, she would absolutely demand he withdraw it to remodel her mother's house, buy her nephew a car, or worse, dump it into the MLM schemes she kept getting involved in. No, absolutely not, Bob muttered, gripping the book. This money was his insurance policy, and now it was the Miller family legacy. He couldn't let it vanish into thin air. He carefully slipped the book into the inside breast pocket of his dark gray suit jacket, his lucky jacket he wore to important meetings. He patted his chest, feeling the solid bulk of the book, feeling a bit more secure. According to his plan, he wasn't meeting Susan until 2 p.m. If he wore this heavy suit jacket to work now, he'd sweat profusely and draw attention, but if he kept it in his briefcase, he feared he might lose it. Calculating his options, he decided to leave the suit jacket hanging on a hook behind his bedroom door. He planned to swing by the house for lunch, grab the jacket, and drive straight to meet his sister. It was foolproof. He locked the metal cabinet even though the cigar box inside was now empty, shoved his keys deep into his pocket out of sheer habit, and shut his bedroom door. Bob left the house, entirely confident he would beat his wife home at lunch to grab the jacket. He never anticipated an unexpected work emergency would prevent him from returning in time to secure the evidence before Carol got off work. He had locked the cabinet, hung the jacket on the hook, checked himself in the mirror, adjusting his collar, smoothing his graying hair. In the mirror, a gaunt, weathered old man stared back with determined, albeit troubled, eyes. He was about to betray his wife, he knew that, but he comforted himself with the thought that it was the best choice. He'd rather be branded a villain than see his life's blood squandered. Bob drove away. He didn't realize that in his anxious rush to stuff the book into his jacket, the corner of the Ziploc bag had snagged on a torn piece of the pocket's inner lining. It hadn't slid all the way to the bottom. It was sitting precariously high, causing the pocket to bulge awkwardly. A minuscule oversight, but one that would trigger the collapse of his perfect master plan. That afternoon, the sun was scorching. Carol returned home from an extra tutoring session, sweat soaking through her blouse. She parked her car, took off her sunglasses, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. Her age, coupled with severe arthritis, made standing in front of a whiteboard for 3 hours absolute torture. But she had to push through. A teacher's pension was barely enough. The cost of living was skyrocketing, and the mortgage on their suburban rental property hung over her head like a guillotine. Carol walked into the house, intending to lie down for a bit before starting dinner. But the ingrained cleanliness of a veteran schoolteacher didn't allow her to rest when the house was messy. She saw Bob's casual shoes kicked off haphazardly by the front door, and a windbreaker tossed lazily over the living room sofa. She shook her head in sheer annoyance. Asterisk, this man is getting old, but still acts like a messy teenager. Asterisk, Carol muttered, picking up after her husband. She grabbed socks from under the coffee table and stacked his old newspapers. As she turned toward the hallway, her eyes locked onto the dark gray suit jacket, hanging randomly on the hook behind his open bedroom door. She frowned in confusion. It was barely the beginning of fall. Why had he pulled out this heavy wool jacket, and why was it hanging here instead of sealed in his garment bag to avoid dust? Bob was notoriously meticulous. His work clothes were always hung up immediately. Why was he so sloppy today? Asterisk. He probably took it out to look at it and forgot to put it away. Asterisk, Carol thought, shaking her head. She reached out to lift the jacket off the hook, intending to move it to the main closet or take it to the dry cleaners if it smelled musty. But as she lifted it, her hand froze. One side of the jacket drooped heavily, weighed down by something unusually dense. With the instinct of a woman who does the laundry, she knew immediately there was a heavy object in the pocket. She reached into the inner breast pocket, assuming Bob had forgotten his bulky wallet or his old, heavy cell phone. But what she pulled out wasn't a wallet, nor a phone. It was a bank passbook, hastily shoved inside a Ziploc bag. Carol stood paralyzed. She had never seen this book in her life. Bob had a standard retirement savings book, but that one was red, and he always kept it in his desk drawer. She knew that one. This blue one was completely alien to her. A terrible premonition snaked its way into her mind. Her hands began to tremble as she slowly slid the passbook out of the plastic bag. The printed name, account holder, Robert J. Miller, practically screamed at her, confirming it was indeed her husband's property. There was no mistake. Carol held her breath and flipped open the first page to view the balance. Her vision swam. The floor felt like it was giving way beneath her. She had to blink hard several times, recounting the zeros lined up behind the number 5. $500,000. Carol's arms went weak. The passbook dropped onto the bed with a soft thud. She staggered backward, having to grab the edge of the dresser to keep from collapsing. $500,000. An astronomical sum that, in her wildest dreams, she never imagined they possessed. Yet, Bob had it. He had $500,000 sitting in an account while spending every single day crying poverty to her. He groaned about paying $410 for a mortgage bill. He haggled over the price of broccoli at the supermarket. He threw tantrums about the electric bill if she left the water heater on for too long. She remembered the time she was sick and wanted to go to a specialized private clinic for better care, but he shot the idea down, calling it a waste of money and forcing her to go to the crowded in-network urgent care to use basic insurance. She remembered her winter coat, the one she had worn for 10 years until the cuffs frayed, because she didn't dare buy a new one for fear of him lecturing her on financial irresponsibility. She remembered the bland, cheap meals, the screaming matches over utility bills that had shattered their marriage. It was all a lie. The truth lay bare before her eyes, naked and brutal. Bob wasn't poor. He was rich, very rich. But he was rich times only for himself asterisk. He had been deceiving her for decades, hoarding a massive fortune in the shadows while treating her like a leech, a financial liability he had to defend against. Tears spilled from Carol's eyes, hot and stinging. They weren't tears of joy that her family was wealthy. They were tears of profound humiliation and betrayal. After 30 years of living together, sharing a roof and a life, she was nothing but a stranger in her husband's eyes. He had never trusted her. He had never viewed her as family, someone to share the sweet and the bitter with. Robert Miller. "You are a cruel, cruel man," Carol choked out, her voice cracking into a sob. She collapsed onto the bed, picked up the passbook, and gripped it so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. A fury ignited in her chest, stronger than anything she had ever felt. She wanted to shred the book into confetti, throw it directly into Bob's face, and scream until her throat bled to release the decades of injustice. But then, the rational mind of a seasoned, mature woman intervened, pulling her back from the edge. Making a scene right now wouldn't achieve anything. He would just deny, deflect, or worse, rapidly transfer the money to an offshore account or a hidden trust. She needed to stay calm. She needed to figure out exactly what he was planning to do with this money. Carol took a deep breath and wiped her face. She carefully slid the passbook back into the Ziploc bag and placed it exactly where she found it inside the jacket pocket, meticulously adjusting the fabric so it looked untouched. She hung the jacket back on the hook and closed the door. When she walked out of the room, her face had returned to its usual stoic, calm demeanor, but her eyes were as sharp as daggers. She wouldn't say a word. She would watch in silence. She wanted to see how long Bob would keep acting in this play. And more importantly, she wanted to see exactly where he was planning to sneak this money off to. That afternoon, when Bob returned home, looking exhausted but with shifty, anxious eyes, he had no idea that the verdict on his lifelong deceit had already been silently rendered by his wife. The real war in this freezing house was only just beginning. A cold front moved in exactly as the Weather Channel predicted, sending a biting chill through the drafty cracks of the old house. That evening, dinner was served earlier than usual. Bob sat at the table, shivering slightly in a thin sweater, not having changed into warmer clothes because he was too distracted. His afternoon meeting with his sister had fallen through. Susan had an unannounced visit from a local health and safety inspector at her boutique, forcing them to postpone the transfer. Bob had no choice but to bring the passbook back home and return it to its hiding spot, completely unaware that his secret had been breached. Carol brought a steaming bowl of beef stew to the table. The steam billowed up, smelling of rosemary and potatoes, but it wasn't enough to thaw the heavy, toxic atmosphere engulfing the couple. Today, she didn't nag him about bills. Her silence was highly unusual. It wasn't her standard resentful silence, but the eerie calm before a hurricane. Bob grabbed his spoon and quickly shoveled in a few bites. He wanted to finish fast and retreat to his bed. The pain in his side was acting up again. But suddenly, Carol scooped a large, tender piece of beef and placed it directly onto his plate. This incredibly rare gesture of care made Bob freeze, his fork hovering in midair. "Eat. The meat is very tender today." "I went to the butcher early to get it," Carol said softly, though her eyes stared at him with a deep, probing intensity. Bob nodded awkwardly, muttering a confused, "Thanks." He looked down and chewed the beef, feeling as if he were swallowing a cinder block. "I saw a special on the news today about investment fraud," Carol suddenly casually remarked, slowly eating her vegetables. "Some retired guy got scammed out of millions in a fake crypto scheme. Now he's collecting aluminum cans to survive. It's tragic." Bob panicked, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't dare look up, just offering a non-committal grunt. Times are tough. Lots of scammers out there. Hard to know who to trust. "Well, You know what they say. Greed is a curse. It's better to keep your money safe in a standard bank rather than chasing crazy high yields and losing it all. Carol continued, her tone conversational, like she was just making small talk. Then, she paused, looking directly at her husband. Say, Bob, I have to ask, you've been working as a senior accountant your whole life, plus taking all those side gigs. You must have saved up a pretty hefty nest egg for retirement by now, right? Carol's question struck him like a sniper's bullet. Bob nearly choked on his stew. He coughed violently, hastily grabbing his water glass to compose himself. He knew it! She was starting to poke around his finances. She probably noticed him coming home at odd hours and got suspicious. He slammed his glass down, plastering on his usual grumpy scowl to mask his terror. Here we go again. How many times do I have to tell you? My pension barely covers my half of the bills in this house. Groceries, medical co-pays, gas, plus that $410 a month for the rental property. Where the hell would I get extra money to hoard? Carol kept staring at him, a faint, mocking smile playing on her lips. Is that so? I just figured, since you're a math whiz and you work so much, you must have a nice little cushion. You think my life is easy. Bob raised his voice, playing the victim. Look at the car I drive. It's a 1998 Accord falling apart, and I can't afford to fix it. Look at this sweater. The cuffs are frayed. I know you've had it rough. Carol set her spoon down, her voice dropping a few degrees cooler. But what if, God forbid, you got hit with a major illness, like a disease that costs hundreds of thousands to treat? What's your plan? Sell the house? Or go beg on GoFundMe? Bob shuddered. Why was she speaking so morbidly today? Did she know he had cancer? Impossible. He had locked his medical files in the trunk of his car, and he had transferred his painkillers into a generic Tylenol bottle. How could she know? Stop cursing me, Bob slammed his hand on the table. I'm perfectly healthy. If I get sick, I'll figure it out myself. I won't bother you, don't worry. Figure it out how, if you have no money? Carol pressed, her eyes flashing with mockery. Or do you have a secret slush fund hidden from me? Are you crazy? I said I don't have anything, Bob yelled, his face flushing dark red. His aggressive denial only amplified his guilt and panic. Carol looked at him in silence for a long, agonizing moment. Her gaze felt like an X-ray, stripping away the layers of his lies. Then she smiled a bitter, loaded smile. All right, if you say you don't have anything, then you don't. I was just asking. Marriage is built on trust, after all. Living in a state of constant deception and paranoia sounds exhausting. With that, she stood up, cleared her plates, and left Bob sitting alone next to his cooling dinner. Her final sentence echoed in his ears. Asterisk. Living in deception sounds exhausting. Asterisk. A chill ran down Bob's spine. There was something terrifying about Carol's demeanor. She definitely didn't believe him. But did she actually know about the passbook? Bob shook his head, desperately trying to dispel the nightmare scenario. No way. He hid it too well. She was just probing. Regardless, he had to get the money to Susan immediately. Every day he delayed was a massive risk. Tomorrow, he would meet her, no matter what. 3 days after that psychologically grueling dinner, Bob's health rapidly deteriorated. The dull aches transitioned into violent, paralyzing cramps that lasted for hours. He had to secretly pop high-dose painkillers just to maintain a facade of normalcy around Carol. He arranged to meet Susan on Friday morning at a local notary public office. He had prepared the legal power of attorney and transfer forms. All he had to do was sign them, and the $500,000 would officially be under Susan's name. The crushing weight on his shoulders would finally be gone. That morning, Bob woke up early. He forced himself to eat the oatmeal Carol made, even though it tasted like ash and made him nauseous. He dressed in his best clothes, combed his graying hair, and sprayed a little cologne to mask the scent of sickness. Before leaving, he looked back at the house one last time, telling himself, asterisk, just get through today, and it's all over. Asterisk, but man plans, and God laughs. As soon as Bob backed his Honda out of the garage, a sudden, blinding agony struck him 10 times worse than any previous attack. It felt like a giant, invisible hand was crushing his swollen liver, cutting off his air supply. The world spun and went black. Bob stumbled out of the car, collapsing onto the concrete driveway. He curled into a ball, clutching his stomach, sweating profusely through his dress shirt. He opened his mouth, gasping for air like a fish out of water, but could only produce broken, agonized groans. Pain. God. The pain. Carol was in the backyard hanging a bird feeder. Hearing the loud thud, she rushed out. Seeing her husband writhing on the concrete, his face a terrifying shade of purple, she panicked. She dropped the birdseed and sprinted to his side. "Bob! Bob, what's happening?" Carol yelled, her voice breaking with raw terror. Despite her anger and her hatred over his financial betrayal, seeing the man she had shared a life with for 30 years screaming, in agony overrode everything. Her basic instinct as a wife took over. She cradled his head, feeling his forehead ice cold, while sweat poured down his face. Bob forced his eyes open to look at his wife, but his vision was blurring. He wanted to tell her times, not times to call an ambulance, not to take him to the hospital. He had to go meet Susan, but the pain had robbed him of the ability to speak. He could only point a trembling finger toward the breast pocket of his jacket, where the passbook was, before completely losing consciousness. Carol screamed for the neighbors. People rushed over. Someone called 911. Others helped prop him up. In the back of the screaming ambulance, Carol sat beside Bob, holding his hand. She could feel his erratic, fading pulse. As the paramedics worked on him, her hand accidentally brushed against his inner breast pocket. She felt the hard rectangle inside. She knew exactly what it was. At the hospital, Bob was rushed straight into the ER. Doctors scrambled, machines blared, and medical jargon filled the air. Carol stood in the hallway, her stomach in knots. She stared at the closed ER doors, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. A while later, Dr. Harrison walked out, looking grim. He recognized the patient from a few days ago. "Family of Robert Miller? I'm here." "I'm his wife," Carol stepped forward. Dr. Harrison looked at her with deep sympathy. "Your husband's condition is critical. The tumor on his liver ruptured, causing severe internal bleeding. We are trying to stop the hemorrhage, but the prognosis is extremely guarded. You need to prepare yourself for the worst. Even if he survives this episode, his remaining time is very short. We might be looking at weeks, or even days." Hearing this, Carol's legs gave out. She had to lean against the wall to stay upright, even though she vaguely suspected he was ill. Hearing terminal cancer and ruptured tumor was a massive shock. She broke down sobbing, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. All the resentment over the money evaporated in an instant, replaced by profound grief for a human life, for her tragic, deeply flawed husband. Bob woke up after 2 days in a deep coma. When he opened his eyes, he saw he was in the ICU, surrounded by a spiderweb of IV tubes and wires. The pain had subsided thanks to heavy narcotics, but his body felt like a completely broken machine, beyond any hope of repair. The first person he saw was Carol. She was slumped asleep over the edge of his bed, her hand lightly holding his bony fingers. Her face was gaunt, dark circles under her eyes from sheer exhaustion. Looking at his wife, Bob felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. While he hovered between life and death, the person keeping vigil by his side was her, the woman he had deemed the enemy. He twitched his fingers, waking Carol. Seeing him awake, she was overjoyed. She quickly poured a cup of warm water and brought a straw to his lips. "You're awake. Sip some water. You scared me to death." Bob took a sip, his dry throat feeling a bit better. He wanted to ask about the savings book, but was afraid to blow his cover. He let his eyes dart around the room, looking for his suit jacket. My jacket?" he whispered weakly. "I hung it in the closet over there." Carol pointed to a small wooden wardrobe in the corner. "Don't worry, I secured all your belongings and money safely." Hearing the word times money asterisk, Bob's heart skipped a beat. Had she opened it? Did she know his secret? But looking at Carol's tender, caring demeanor, he reassured himself. If she knew he was hiding $500,000, she would have raised hell by now. She would never sit here nursing him so lovingly. Right at that moment, the hospital room door burst open. A middle-aged woman, dressed in flashy designer clothes and heavy makeup, barged in. It was Susan. "Oh my God, Bob. What happened to you? How did you end up like this?" Susan rushed to the bed, wailing theatrically. She was so loud that patients in the neighboring beds grimaced. Carol stood up, yielding her spot to her sister-in-law. She looked at Susan with clear distaste, but maintained her manners. "Susan, the doctor said he just woke up and needs quiet. Please lower your voice." Susan shot Carol a venomous glare. "Excuse me? My brother is lying here half dead, and you're telling me to be quiet. What kind of wife are you, letting him get this sick before bringing him to a hospital? Or were you just too cheap to pay for his doctor's visits?" Carol froze at the blatant, ridiculous accusation. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but stopped. She knew Susan's toxic personality. Arguing logic with her was pointless. She quietly left the room to give the siblings privacy. As soon as Carol was out of sight, Susan's demeanor flipped instantly. She leaned in close to Bob's ear, whispering with a face full of greedy anxiety. "Bob, thank God you're awake. I was so worried. Where is the passbook? Do you have it on you? You're in no shape to hold it. Give it to me now to keep safe, or else Carol will find it, and we lose everything." Bob looked at his sister, a complex wave of emotion hitting him. She came to visit him on his deathbed. Her first question was a fake inquiry about his health. Her second question was demanding the money. But in this situation, he had no other choice. He whispered weakly, "It's in my suit jacket, hanging in the closet. Take it quickly and hide it. Don't let Carol see." Susan's eyes lit up like high beams. She practically sprinted to the closet, threw open the door, and rummaged through the jacket. She shoved her hand into the breast pocket. When her fingers brushed the passbook, a look of pure, euphoric satisfaction washed over her face. She pulled it out, took one rapid glance at the $500,000 balance, and shoved it deep into her Louis Vuitton purse. "Okay, I got it. Don't worry, Bob, just rest. I will guard it with my life. Not a single cent will go missing." Susan patted her purse, grinning widely. She walked back to the bed, squeezed Bob's hand half-heartedly. "All right, get some rest. I have to get back to the boutique. My staff is blowing up my phone. I'll come visit you later." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and speed-walked out the door, moving so fast she looked like she was fleeing a crime scene. She brushed right past Carol in the hallway without saying a single word. Bob lay on his bed, watching his sister's retreating back disappear through the glass door. Suddenly, a profound sense of emptiness washed over him. He had just handed over his entire life's fortune to her, and she literally abandoned him the second the cash was in her hands. Not a single question about his pain, his treatment, or if he needed anything. Carol walked back into the room to find Bob staring blankly at the ceiling, his eyes watering. She didn't ask where Susan went, nor did she ask what just happened. She simply took a warm washcloth and gently wiped his face, then sat down to peel an orange for him. "Have a piece of orange. The doctor says you need vitamin C." Carol brought a perfectly peeled slice to his lips. Bob looked at his wife. He looked at her rough hands, calloused from years of hard work, and then he thought of Susan's hands manicured, painted bright red, stacked with gold rings. A bitter comparison lodged itself in his brain. He opened his mouth to eat the orange slice she fed him. The fruit was sweet, but he felt an overwhelming, crushing bitterness in his soul. He had just committed an unforgivable betrayal against the woman sitting right in front of him. He had stripped her of her legal rights to give his wealth to his materialistic sister. But regret was useless now. The money had changed hands. The ship had sailed. He closed his eyes, trying to force himself to sleep, to escape the guilt gnawing at his conscience. The night in the ICU was agonizingly long and terrifyingly quiet. Bob tossed and turned, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. The image of his sister grabbing the passbook and fleeing haunted him. Would Susan keep her promise? Would she use the money to ensure he had a dignified death? Or would she blow it on some idiotic business venture like she always did? Amidst his racing thoughts, his phone buzzed under his pillow. It was Susan calling. He glanced at the cot next to him. Carol was fast asleep, her breathing steady. He pulled the blanket over his head and whispered into the phone. "Yeah, I'm here. Why are you calling so late?" "Bob, listen to me." Susan's voice was loud, laced with manic excitement and a hint of panic. "I looked closely at the passbook. The account is in your Times name. To withdraw the money, I either need you to go to the bank in person, or I need a legally notarized power of attorney or a will. You're stuck in a hospital bed. You can't go to Chase. So what are you saying?" Bob asked, his heart rate spiking. "We need airtight legal documents. I already contacted Attorney Davis. He said in your case, it's best to draft an emergency will or an immediate deed of gift, notarized on the spot. Tomorrow, I'm bringing the lawyer to the hospital. You just sign on the dotted line, and it's done. The money will legally, undeniably be mine, and I can withdraw it to take care of you." Bob thought for a moment. Susan made sense. If he just died, the money would automatically enter probate as part of his estate. As his spouse, Carol would inherently inherit half, if not all of it. He couldn't stomach that. "Fine. Set it up. But you have to be totally discreet. Due times, not times, let Carol know. If she finds out, the whole thing blows up. Don't worry, I have it all planned out. Tomorrow, I'll wait until she leaves to grab lunch or run an errand, and I'll bring the lawyer in. In and out in 15 minutes, you just have to sign. Okay. Make sure it's bulletproof. I'm handing my life and my fortune over to you, Susan. Do not let me down." I know, geez. Go to sleep, save your strength for tomorrow." Susan hung up abruptly. Bob sighed, lowering his phone. The plan was locked in. Once tomorrow passed, he could finally close his eyes in peace. His assets would be preserved for his bloodline. The next morning, Carol woke up early as usual to help Bob wash up and sponge bathe him. She did everything meticulously, gently, without a single complaint. Watching her wring out the warm towel, Bob felt his heart sink. She was caring for him so selflessly while he was plotting to strip her of everything behind her back. "How do you feel today? Is the pain any better?" Carol asked as she wiped his face. "Tolerable. Just leave me be." "I can manage," Bob deflected, avoiding her gaze. "How can I leave you be? We are husband and wife. When we are healthy, we might act indifferent, but in sickness and tragedy, that's when you see someone's true heart," Carol said casually, but her words made Bob flinch in guilt. Around 9 a.m., Susan texted that she and the lawyer were in the hospital lobby. Bob immediately tried to find a way to get rid of Carol. "Carol, I have a massive craving for chicken noodle soup. Do you think you could go down the street to that deli and get me a bowl? The hospital food is like cardboard. I can't swallow it." Carol looked at him, surprised. Usually, he hated the sodium in deli soups. Why the sudden change? But seeing her husband want to eat, she obliged. "All right. You wait here, I'll be quick." The moment Carol disappeared down the hall with her purse, Susan and a man in a sharp black suit, carrying a briefcase, slipped into the room. They had been hiding by the elevators. "Hurry up, Bob, she's gone. This is Attorney Davis. I already paid his retainer." Susan rushed, pushing the lawyer toward the bed. Attorney Davis nodded politely to Bob and quickly pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase. He briefly explained the contents of the last will and testament, confirming that it was completely legal and would take effect immediately upon execution. Bob had no mental bandwidth to read the fine print. He just skimmed down to the most important line. Asterisk sole beneficiary, Susan Miller. Asterisk, that was enough. His hand shaking violently, Bob gripped the pen and scrawled a messy, but definitive, signature at the bottom of the page. "All done. Congratulations, sir. Your wishes are secured." Attorney Davis stamped the document with his notary seal and packed it away. Susan clutched a copy of the will, her eyes practically glowing. She grinned from ear to ear. "It's done. Now you just focus on resting. I'll take care of everything else. You don't have to worry about the money ever again." Just then, the familiar sound of Carol's footsteps approached from the hallway. Bob turned pale, frantically waving at his sister and the lawyer. "Go, get out of here." "She's coming!" Susan and the lawyer scrambled, rushing out the secondary door of the ICU suite just as Carol walked through the main door. Carol caught a glimpse of the two strangers' backs, but said nothing. She calmly placed the hot container of chicken noodle soup on the tray table, acting as if nothing had happened. Bob exhaled a massive breath, sweat pouring down his face. Asterisk, it was finally done. Asterisk, he had won the ultimate chess match of his life. Carol poured the soup into a bowl, the rich aroma of chicken broth filling the air. She pulled her chair up to the bed, scooped a spoonful, blew on it to cool it down, and brought it to her husband's mouth. Her demeanor was as attentive and caring as always, but Bob sensed something deeply different in her eyes. They were as calm as a placid lake, without a single ripple, but hiding a bottomless abyss underneath. Bob ate the soup, but it tasted like sawdust. As he ate, he secretly watched his wife. Asterisk, did she see Susan and the lawyer? Asterisk, she absolutely had to have seen them. They walked out exactly as she walked in, so why wasn't she asking? Why wasn't she curious about who they were or what they were doing? Carol's silence terrified Bob to his core. If she had screamed, interrogated him, or cursed him out, he would know how to fight back. But her absolute, dead silence made him feel like prey trapped in the crosshairs of a master hunter. "Did you have visitors while I was gone?" Carol suddenly asked, her hand steadily scooping another spoonful of soup. Bob jumped, nearly choking. He scrambled to lie. Yeah. Just some old buddies from the accounting firm. They heard I was sick and stopped by." "Your buddies sure left in a hurry. I just got to the door and they were practically running away." "And why was your friend leaving with Susan?" Carol asked. Her voice was gentle, but every word sliced into Bob's chest like a scalpel. Bob choked. "She did times see Susan," he stammered, making up a pathetic excuse. "Well, Susan guided them up here. They didn't know the room number, so she showed them the way." "Oh, how thoughtful of Susan." Carol smiled. A thin, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. She set the bowl down, took an apple from a bag, and pulled out a paring knife. She began peeling the apple. The blade moved with smooth, lethal precision, the red skin falling onto the plate in a perfect, continuous spiral. Watching the knife in her hands, Bob felt a surge of pure dread. "You know, Bob, people say that when a person knows they don't have much time left, they worry a lot. They try to calculate and arrange everything for the people left behind, afraid their loved ones will suffer. Are you doing that?" The question sent an icy shockwave down Bob's spine. What was she implying? Did she know about the will? I don't have anything to calculate. I can't even take care of myself right now," he denied desperately. Carol cut a slice of apple and handed it to him. "Eat this. It's sweet. It's good that you aren't worrying. I see so many people who spend their entire lives scheming, calculating, and holding grudges, right up until the day they die. They think they're so smart. They think by organizing everything perfectly, they win. But they don't realize that when they die, what they lose is infinitely greater than what they hoarded." Bob held the apple slice, his hands shaking. Every single word Carol spoke was peeling back his soul. Asterisk, she knows. Asterisk, he was certain of it. Asterisk, she knows everything. Asterisk, but why wasn't she exposing him? Why was she still caring for him, speaking to him in these philosophical riddles? "Carol, if you have something to say, just say it. Stop talking in circles," Bob snapped weakly, unable to handle the psychological pressure. Carol looked straight into his eyes. Her gaze was no longer cold, it shifted into profound pity. "I don't have anything to say. I just want you to rest and get better. Whatever happens, happens. You can rest easy. I am not going to fight you for anything. Whatever is meant to be mine will be mine. Whatever isn't, no amount of scheming will force it." With that, she went back to peeling the apple, her face returning to its eerie serenity. Her absolute calm made Bob feel small, petty, and pathetic. He thought he was the mastermind holding all the cards, controlling the game. But now, he realized he might have just tied himself into a trap built by his own greed and selfishness. That afternoon, Bob lay in his hospital bed, feeling like he was lying on hot coals. Carol's cryptic words buzzed in his head like hornets. Asterisk, Whatever is meant to be mine will be mine. Asterisk. What did that mean? What was she planning? He couldn't just lie there and wait for the axe to fall. He had to ensure that his will was absolutely bulletproof and that no one could overturn the chessboard. When Carol left the room to use the restroom, he secretly called Susan. Susan, are the documents totally finalized? What did the lawyer say? Is it 100% airtight? Relax, Bob. Susan's loud voice echoed from the speaker. Attorney Davis is the best in the city. The will you signed is the highest legal document. It's notarized and witnessed. Carol couldn't touch that money even if she sprouted wings. Just sleep like a baby. Hearing his sister's absolute confidence, Bob finally exhaled. Asterisk. Right. Black ink on white paper, stamped and witnessed by a lawyer. Who could argue with that? Asterisk. He laughed at his own paranoia. Carol was probably just trying to scare him. She had no proof, no legal standing to demand a dime. Bob sank into his pillows, a wave of smug satisfaction washing over him. He imagined the look on Carol's face when she found out he left his entire estate to his sister. She would go insane. She would scream, she would curse his name. But by then, he would be safely 6 feet under. What could she do to him? That evening, Carol returned to the room, carrying a thermos of dinner and a small overnight bag. She maintained her calm demeanor, not bringing up the morning's events. After he ate, Carol sat on the edge of the bed and massaged his swollen legs. Her hands were warm, her touch soothing the deep aches in his bones. Looking at his wife, Bob suddenly blurted out a highly provocative statement, unable to resist asserting his victory. Carol, I need to tell you. I have already arranged all my assets. If something happens to me, don't even think about fighting over anything. I lived fairly, and I'll die fairly. 50 over 50. To the very end. Carol stopped massaging him and looked up. She didn't look shocked or angry, as he had desperately hoped. Instead, she smiled a gentle, incredibly forgiving smile. Is that so? Well, it's good you got your affairs in order. It's normal for the elderly to plan ahead. You just focus on resting. I already told you, I am not greedy for your things. I respect your decisions. Carol's reaction left Bob utterly deflated. It was like throwing a maximum force punch into a cotton pillow. There was zero impact. He felt hollow and inexplicably furious. Asterisk. Why wasn't she reacting? Why was she so terrifyingly calm? Asterisk you. You aren't even going to ask who I left it to, Bob pressed, his curiosity driving him crazy. Who you give it to is your right, Carol replied, her voice smooth. Give it to Susan, give it to charity, give it to a homeless man on the street. As long as it brings you peace, that's all that matters. Bob was struck dumb. He literally had no idea what to say. His wife's grace or fake acting, he couldn't tell, made him feel incredibly petty, but he quickly reassured himself. Asterisk, she just doesn't believe I actually did it. She thinks I'm bluffing. Just wait, you'll see. Asterisk, that night Bob fell asleep with a satisfied smirk on his face. In his dreams, he was standing on top of a massive mountain of $100 bills. He looked down and saw Carol standing at the bottom, gazing up at him with greedy, helpless eyes. He laughed hysterically, his voice echoing in the void. But he didn't know that on the cot right next to him, Carol was wide awake. She lay facing away from him, her eyes wide open in the dark. Her mind wasn't filled with jealousy or hatred. It was focused on a meticulous, legally flawless plan she had already set in motion. She didn't need to fight a dying man. She was going to use the law, and the sheer power of the truth, to take back exactly what she was owed. And more importantly, she was going to teach Robert Miller one final, devastating lesson about the true meaning of marriage before it was too late. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, hitting Bob right in the eyes and waking him up. His entire body ached, but his mind was unusually sharp. The first thing he did was look for Carol. She wasn't there. The cot was neatly folded up. Her thermos was gone from the table. Bob frowned. Normally, she was back with breakfast by now. Was she mad about last night and finally abandoned him? A sliver of panic crept in, but he brushed it off. Asterisk good. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk, I don't have to look at her fake face anymore. Asterisk half an hour later, the door swung open. Carol walked in. But she wasn't alone. Accompanying her was a man in his early 40s, wearing a sharp, tailored gray suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He looked incredibly professional and authoritative. Bob sat up slightly, his heart jumping into his throat, his eyes glued to the stranger. "Who is that? Why did you bring him in here?" Carol didn't answer immediately. She calmly placed a bag of fresh fruit on the table, pulled up a chair for the man to sit, and then turned to her husband. She offered a soft, deeply loaded smile. "Bob, allow me to introduce Attorney Mitchell. He is my legal representation." "A lawyer? What do you need a lawyer for?" Bob yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Are you suing me? I told you, my money is mine. I can give it to whoever I want." "You're suing over nothing." Attorney Mitchell smiled, a practiced, razor-sharp expression. He gave Bob a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Please calm down. I am not here to argue with you. I am here to clarify some legal facts regarding joint marital assets acquired during the course of a marriage." "Joint assets? What joint assets?" "That is my personal time's money. I earned it. I saved it." "She didn't contribute a single dime." Bob screamed, his face turning purple. "We lived with independent finances for 30 years. 50/50 split. I have the ledgers to prove it. Don't you try to steal from me." Carol maintained a terrifying composure. She gestured to her lawyer. Attorney Mitchell opened his briefcase and placed a legal folder on the table. "Mr. Miller, according to the family law in this state, we operate under community property laws. Any and all income, assets, and properties acquired by either spouse during the course of the marriage are legally considered 50/50 community property, regardless of whose name is on the bank account. The only exception is if there is a legally binding, notarized postnuptial agreement. Your verbal agreement to go Dutch, or your personal ledgers tracking grocery bills, hold zero legal weight in overriding your wife's 50% ownership of a $500,000 cash asset." Bob's ears rang so loud he thought he would go deaf. He didn't understand all the legal jargon, but he understood one thing: he was in massive trouble. He glared at Carol, his eyes full of hatred. You're good. You went behind my back and pulled this stunt? You're trying to rob me of my blood, sweat, and tears." Carol looked him dead in the eye. Her voice was no longer gentle. It was forged from steel. "Bob, who is robbing who here? For 30 years, I sacrificed everything for this house. I skimped, I saved, I cooked every meal, I took care of you. I held this family together so you could focus on your career. Is my labor worth less than the money you hid from me? That money was from my side jobs. I stayed up all night working. You just worked your basic teaching job for pennies. What did you contribute?" Bob argued pathetically. "Fine. You want to calculate? Let's calculate." Carol stood up and walked right up to the hospital bed. "My salary was lower, yes, but I used 100% of my income to cover the gaps in our living expenses, the holidays, the gifts for your family, the medical copays when you were short. And your salary? You hoarded it. You said you were saving for the big things. Where are the big things, Bob? The roof is leaking, and you refuse to fix it. We don't even have kids to pay college tuition for. What were you saving for? Turns out, you were just getting rich for yourself." Bob choked. Carol's words were like needles, piercing his exact weak spots. It was true. For decades, he let his wife handle all the minor, invisible expenses of life, while he strictly contributed his calculated 50% to the major bills. He thought that was fair. "Did you think I was stupid?" Carol's voice trembled with years of suppressed emotion. "Did you think I was so naive I didn't know you were secretly trading stocks and buying gold? I knew times everything asterisk. But I stayed silent because I respected you. I thought you were building a nest egg, so we wouldn't be a burden on anyone when we got old and sick. I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined you viewed me as a parasite and that you were plotting to launder our life savings to your sister." Bob was paralyzed. Asterisk, she knew. Asterisk, she wasn't naive at all. She had been silently watching and enduring everything. So what do you want?" Bob slumped back in defeat, his voice bitter. You want half? Fine. We split it. I'll give you your half. Are you happy now? He figured losing half was better than losing it all, or spending his last days fighting a messy lawsuit. But Carol's answer stunned him. I don't want your money, she stated flatly. What? Both Bob and Attorney Mitchell looked at her in surprise. I said, I don't want your money. You want to keep it? Keep it. Use it. Give it to Susan, give it to whoever. I brought my lawyer here today for one reason only, to prove to you that I times have the absolute legal right times to take it. But I am times choosing times not to. I am not the greedy, pathetic leech you think I am. Carol looked at Bob with a gaze filled with overwhelming pity and profound disappointment. Keep your money. Keep it to buy your painkillers and hire a private nurse. As for me, after you're gone, I have my teacher's pension. I will live just fine. I don't need to rely on your filthy, calculated blood money. Turning to her lawyer, she said, Thank you, Attorney Mitchell. You can leave now. I will handle my family matters from here. Attorney Mitchell nodded respectfully, packed up his files, and left the room. The silence that fell over the hospital room was suffocating. Bob lay dead still on his bed. The psychological blow Carol had just delivered was infinitely more devastating than any legal judgment. She had won. She had won absolutely, and with such high moral ground that it made Bob feel utterly pathetic and humiliated. That afternoon, Susan came sprinting into the hospital room, her face pale, sweating profusely, ruining her heavy makeup. Bob, oh my God, we have a disaster. I just heard Carol hired Attorney Mitchell. He's a shark. He specializes in ruthless divorce asset recovery. Did she do anything to you? Did she force you to sign anything? Looking at his sister's manic panic over the cash, Bob suddenly felt incredibly exhausted. He shook his head weakly. No, she didn't make me sign anything. Really? Then why did she bring a shark lawyer in here? Just to scare you? Susan's eyes went wide. She said, She doesn't want the money. She said, Your money is yours to keep. Bob repeated his wife's words, his voice bitter. Susan burst out laughing, a shrill, piercing sound. Oh, please, are you actually buying that? A cat refusing a bowl of cream? She's acting. She's playing the long game, acting all high and mighty to guilt-trip you into changing the will. Don't fall for it. The money is in my bag. It's mine, and no one is taking it back. Hearing Susan, Bob felt his resolve waver. Asterisk right. Who on earth walks away from $500,000? It's $500,000, not $50. Asterisk. The deep-seated paranoia that ran in his blood flared up again, crushing the tiny bit of remorse that had begun to sprout. So what do we do? Bob asked anxiously. Just lay low. Don't do anything stupid. Let me handle it. I'll have Attorney Davis draft an affidavit of separate property. You sign it, and it's ironclad. Plus, I'm going to wire the funds into a secondary offshore account just to be safe. God forbid she tries to get a judge to freeze the account. Fine. Do whatever you have to do, just don't lose the money, Bob agreed. Right at that moment, the door pushed open. Carol walked in, carrying a thermos of soup. She saw Susan but didn't say a word, quietly walking to the bedside and setting the thermos down. Susan puffed out her chest, her voice dripping with challenge. Hey, Carol, I heard you're trying to sue for the assets? Let me tell you something. My brother signed a legal will. It's notarized. Don't even try your dirty tricks. Carol turned to look at Susan, her eyes remarkably calm. Susan, you can hug that will tightly while you sleep. I already told Bob, I am not fighting you for it, but let me give you a piece of advice. Money is an external object. Human decency is what matters. Don't sell your soul for a pile of cash. Oh, please, spare me the holy lecture. Can you eat decency? Susan sneered. My brother trusts me, so he gave me the money. Are you just jealous? Shut up, Bob suddenly roared, his head pounding like a jackhammer. Haven't you two argued enough? Leave me alone. Susan huffed, glaring at Carol, then turned to Bob with a sickeningly sweet voice. Okay, you rest. I'm going. I'll be back tomorrow. She grabbed her designer bag and marched out. Carol calmly poured the soup into a bowl, acting as if the screaming match had never happened. She helped Bob sit up and began feeding him. Eat. It's cream of chicken and mushroom. I slow-cooked it all morning. It's very soft. Bob looked at the steaming soup, then at his wife's weathered face. A chaotic storm of emotions raged inside him. Anger, pity, fear, and doubt. He genuinely didn't know what was real and what was fake in this marriage anymore. Carol, do you really not want the money? Bob asked again, his voice shaking. Carol stopped feeding him and looked deep into his eyes. Bob, I lived with you for 30 years. You should know what I need better than anyone. If I were a gold digger, I would have divorced you the day you made us split the grocery bill. I stayed because of my vows. Because I hoped that one day, you would change. You would realize that a family is more important than a bank account. But I was wrong. Right up to your deathbed, you are clutching that savings book. Fine, that is your choice. I respect it. Her words were soft but cut incredibly deep, leaving Bob speechless. He looked down, avoiding her gaze. The bowl of soup suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 2 days later, Bob's condition took a catastrophic nosedive. He began vomiting blood, and his oxygen levels dropped so low he had to be put on a continuous ventilator. Dr. Harrison shook his head and told the family to make final arrangements. He likely wouldn't survive the week. Hearing the news, Susan rushed to the hospital to stand vigil 24/7. Not because she was worried about her brother's suffering, but because she was terrified he would die before signing the affidavit of separate property that Attorney Davis had just finished drafting. She paced frantically around the bed, constantly shaking Bob awake, shoving a pen into his weak hand, begging him to sign. Carol witnessed the entire spectacle, her heart breaking. She wasn't hurt over the money. She was devastated watching her husband be treated like a human signature machine by his own sister, denied peace even in his final hours. Unable to tolerate it any longer, Carol took action. She stepped into the hall and made a call. Attorney Mitchell, please come to City General Hospital immediately. We have an emergency. 30 minutes later, Attorney Mitchell arrived with an associate. They documented Susan physically forcing a dying man to sign legal documents. Mitchell stepped forward, invoking the law to put an end to the madness. Step away from the patient, Attorney Mitchell barked. Susan jumped, dropping the pen. It clattered to the floor. She spun around, glaring at the newcomers. Who the hell are you? What are you doing in here? I am the legal counsel for Mrs. Carol Miller. We are here to file an emergency injunction to freeze and inventory all marital assets belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Attorney Mitchell stated loudly. What marital assets? This is my brother's private money, Susan shrieked. Attorney Mitchell calmly pulled out a legal brief. Ma'am, under state family law, all income, currency, and property acquired during the marriage are community property. The $500,000 cash in Mr. Miller's account was accumulated during their 30-year marriage. It is unequivocally joint property. Mr. Miller's attempt to unilaterally gift 100% of these community funds to you via a will is a violation of state law, infringing on Mrs. Miller's legal ownership of 50% of that estate. Furthermore, attempting to force a critically ill, heavily medicated patient to sign legal waivers constitutes undue influence and elder abuse, which carries severe criminal penalties. The lawyer's ironclad legal threat struck Susan dumb. She turned pale and backed away. She knew the lawyer was right, but her greed wouldn't let her accept defeat. Bob lay on the bed, hearing every single word of the argument with crystal clarity. He looked at Susan, the sister he had trusted with his life and legacy now exposed as a shameless, greedy vulture. Then he looked at Carol. The wife he had spent his life guarding against was standing there with a lawyer, not to steal his money, but to establish justice and stop a crime from taking place. Carol walked up to the bed and took his hand. Bob, did you hear that? The law is fair. You cannot give away what isn't yours. I didn't do this to take your money. I did this so you could finally see the true faces of the people around you, so you could see who actually gives a damn about you. Tears streamed down Bob's face. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to scream his regrets, but his strength was entirely depleted. He could only squeeze his wife's hand a weak, trembling squeeze to replace the thousands of words he couldn't say. After Attorney Mitchell and the associate finished documenting the scene, Susan stormed out, throwing a few empty threats over her shoulder. The hospital room returned to a heavy silence, leaving only Carol and Bob. Carol sat down, taking a tissue to wipe the sweat from his forehead. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes full of complex emotions. "Bob, since we are at the end, I'm going to tell you the truth about something." Bob opened his eyes, waiting. Carol opened her purse and pulled out a small, worn black leather notebook. She flipped through the pages and held it up for him to see. "This is my personal ledger from the past 30 years. Bob squinted to read it. On the yellowed pages, written in neat handwriting, were detailed entries of every single piece of hidden income he had ever made. Asterisk the 15th of May 1998. Bob got a $5,000 bonus from the corporate merger. Told me it was $500. Asterisk asterisk. The 20th of November 2005. Bob sold the inherited plot of land in Ohio for $200,000. Lied and said the family gave it to his cousin. Asterisk asterisk June 2010. Bob started day trading crypto. Caught him checking his ledger at 2 a.m. Asterisk asterisk 2018. Bob bought 10 gold bars when the market dipped. Asterisk. Bob read the entries, a freezing sweat breaking out over his entire body. Every number, every event, was recorded with terrifying accuracy. You knew everything?" he wheezed, his voice trembling with horror. "Yes, I knew everything." Carol nodded, her tone flat. "I am your wife. We live in the same house. We sleep in the same bed. I know what you're thinking just by the way you sigh, let alone your money. Did you really think you were a mastermind? Did you think I didn't hear your hushed phone calls with your brokers, or see you counting cash in the dead of night? Then, why didn't you say anything? Why did you?" Bob couldn't comprehend it. If she knew he was loaded, why did she tolerate their miserable, penny-pinching lifestyle for decades? Why? Carol smiled a heartbreaking smile. "Because I was waiting. I was waiting for the day you would voluntarily tell me the truth. I was waiting for the day you realized that marriage is about trust and sharing. I convinced myself you were hoarding it so we could have a safe retirement, so we wouldn't burden anyone when we got old. I respected your secret fund because I thought everyone deserved a little privacy." Tears dripped from Carol's eyes, splashing onto the pages of the black notebook. "But I was wrong. You didn't view me as a wife. You viewed me as a stranger, an enemy trying to rob you. You'd rather give it to your sister who hasn't cooked you a single meal in her life than leave me a single dollar. Do you have any idea how much that broke my heart?" Bob broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. It was the devastating cry of a man who had reached the end of his life, only to realize he had lived it entirely wrong. He had been so incredibly selfish. He had traded his family's happiness and the loyal love of his wife for soulless numbers in a bank account. And now, facing the Reaper, he realized those numbers were completely worthless. They couldn't buy him health. They couldn't buy him family. And they had very nearly destroyed the last shred of love his wife had for him. "Carol, I was wrong. I am so sorry," Bob sobbed, choking on his own tears. Carol gripped his hand tightly, her tears mixing with his. "Stop talking. Just rest. It's in the past. I didn't say all this to punish you. I said it so you could pass on with a clean conscience, with no more secrets between us." In that profound moment, the invisible wall that had separated them for 30 years completely crumbled. All that remained was a late, agonizing regret, and a deep marital bond that neither time nor money could ever truly erase. Susan returned to the hospital the next morning. She no longer had her aggressive, designer-clad swagger. Her face was swollen, her eyes bloodshot. She clutched her Louis Vuitton purse, but she walked like a ghost. Her confrontation with Attorney Mitchell the day before had dealt a fatal blow to her bottomless greed, forcing her to face a harsh reality. She stood outside the ICU door, too ashamed to walk in. Through the glass, she saw her sister-in-law gently wiping her brother's face with a warm cloth. That simple, beautiful act of care made Susan's heart ache. She remembered when Bob was healthy. Whenever she visited, Carol was always bustling in the kitchen cooking, while Bob sat on the couch watching football. Susan used to join Bob in mocking Carol for being a cheap, uncultured housewife. She had actively encouraged Bob to hide his money from his wife. Carol turned around and caught Susan's eye through the glass. She didn't look angry, nor did she shoo her away. She just gave a subtle nod, signaling for her to come in. Susan tiptoed into the room, sitting on a chair in the far corner, as far from the bed as possible, like a criminal awaiting sentencing. How? How is Bob doing, Carol? Susan asked meekly, avoiding eye contact. The same. The doctors say he's just holding on hour by hour, Carol replied, her voice neutral. Silence blanketed the room, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic wheezing of Bob's ventilator. Susan fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Finally, she gathered the courage to speak. Carol, about yesterday. You don't need to. Carol cut her off. I understand, Susan. Anyone staring at $500,000 would be blinded by it. You're his biological sister. Wanting to secure his money is human nature. Carol's grace caught Susan completely off guard. She looked up at her sister-in-law in shock. She had mentally prepared herself to be screamed at, cursed, and thrown out of the room by security. But Carol was as calm and gentle as water. You aren't mad at me. I literally tried to steal your entire life savings, Susan asked, her voice trembling. Carol sighed, looking out the hospital window at the gray sky. Mad? At first, I was furious. I hated Bob for his betrayal. I hated you for your greed. But then, looking at him lying there, fighting for every single breath, I realized all this hatred is meaningless. What is the point of having millions if the person is gone? Even if you took the full $500,000, it wouldn't bring your brother back to life. Would you really be happy? Susan dropped her head, tears pouring freely down her face. Carol's words pierced her conscience, a conscience that had been buried under decades of materialism. She realized how monstrous she had been. While her brother lay dying, all she cared about was notarizing documents and offshore wire transfers, forgetting that he needed family love, not a financial guardian. Carol, I was wrong. I am so sorry, Susan wailed, sobbing into her hands. I always thought you were this vicious woman just waiting to steal Bob's money, which is why I told him to guard it. I had no idea you loved him this much. Carol walked over to Susan and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Stop crying. Knowing you were wrong is what matters. We're family. We don't hold grudges forever. The most important thing right now is making sure Bob's final days are peaceful. Don't let him die, agonizing over a bank account. Susan nodded frantically, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She opened her purse, pulled out the blue Chase passbook and the last will and testament, and with shaking hands, placed them on the table. Here, I'm giving it back to you. I don't dare hold on to this anymore. This money is your blood and sweat. You have full authority over it. Carol looked at the items on the table and smiled softly. You hold on to it for me. I trust you. Right now, I'm entirely focused on caring for him. I don't have the mental energy to guard money. When his funeral is over, we will sit down and sort it out. I promise you will get your fair legal share. I won't cheat you. The act of returning the money, met with Carol's absolute trust, completely shattered the final walls of greed and defensiveness inside Susan. She realized that this plain, unassuming woman possessed a capacity for forgiveness and greatness that Susan, no matter how many designer bags she bought, could never match. She had lost utterly and respectfully to the outsider she and her brother had always looked down upon. That afternoon, the hospital room was quiet. Bob had regained a brief moment of lucidity. Though incredibly weak, the madness had left his eyes. Carol propped up his pillows and sat beside him, holding a hand that was now nothing but skin and bone. How are you feeling? Carol asked softly. A little better, Bob whispered, his voice like a gentle breeze. He looked at his wife, his eyes filled with immense regret and a lingering question he needed answered. Carol, I have to ask you something. Go ahead. Why? Years ago. Why did you agree to the 50-over-50 split? Didn't you think I was being a monster? Bob asked, his breathing labored. It was the question that had tortured him, ever since he realized she wasn't the greedy monster he thought she was. Carol sat in silence for a long moment, as if sifting through the dust of decades-old memories. Then she began to speak, her voice as melancholic as rain hitting a window pane. "Do you remember the day I wired the money to my mom to fix her roof? You screamed at me. You accused me of funneling your hard-earned money to my family. Do you know how I felt in that moment? I felt degraded, Bob. I worked too. I had a salary. It wasn't as much as yours, but it was honest money. Yet in your eyes, I was a gold digger who only married you to be an ATM for my parents." Bob closed his eyes. 2 streams of tears slid down his temples. He remembered that day. He had been cruel. He had crushed her dignity. When you demanded we split our finances, I was in shock. But then I realized, if I didn't agree, you would look down on me forever. You would always think I was a dependent. I wanted to prove to you that without your money, I could still survive. I could still take care of myself and my family. I agreed, not because I wanted to distance myself from you, but because I wanted you to respect me. I wanted us to be equals in our own home. Carol's voice shook with suppressed emotion. But I made a terrible mistake. I thought financial independence would earn your respect. Instead, it built a fortress between us. You became more calculating, more distant. You treated paying for half the groceries like a legal obligation, and I exhausted myself trying not to look inferior. We lived in the same house, but acted like roommates. We ate at the same table, but our hearts were miles apart. Bob opened his eyes, staring at his wife with absolute agony. Asterisk. So that was it. Asterisk. The 50/50 system he had been so incredibly proud of, thinking it was modern, fair, and logical, was actually a slow-acting poison that assassinated their marriage. He had been so selfish, so obsessed with currency, that he completely ignored the emotional needs of his life partner. He had pushed her away with his own paranoia and greed. "Carol, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Bob cried, his voice dripping with sorrow. "If I told you, would you have listened?" Carol smiled sadly. "Back then, you were drunk on your investment schemes. You were so proud of your secret stash. If I had spoken up, you would have accused me of manipulating you to get to your wallet. So I chose to stay silent, hoping time would mature you. But I waited forever. I waited until our hair turned gray. I waited until you were leaving me forever, for you to finally understand." Bob sobbed, a violent rattling sound deep in his chest. He tried to lift his arms to pull his wife into a hug, but he had zero strength left. He could only look at her through a blur of tears, his heart consumed by a regret that came far too late. I was so stupid. I was so awful," Bob wept. Carol leaned down and wrapped her arms around him, letting her tears soak into his hospital gown. "Shh, Bob. It's in the past. It's over. As long as you understand my heart now, that's enough. We've paid off our karmic debts to each other in this life. Don't torture yourself anymore. It's bad for your health." In the fading light of the afternoon, 2 gray heads rested against each other. The tears of regret and the tears of forgiveness mingled, washing away 30 long, grueling years of misunderstandings and bitter resentment. Over the next few days, Bob's health failed completely. His body withered away, his skin turned a deep, jaundiced yellow, and his abdomen swelled with fluid. The comas became more frequent and lasted longer. The doctors said his time was measured in hours. But in his rare moments of clarity, Bob felt a bizarre, profound peace in his soul. Gone were the calculations of profit and loss. Gone was the terror of losing his fortune. Gone was the paranoia and defense mechanisms. All that remained was an ocean of love and boundless gratitude for the wife who stood vigil by his side every single minute of every single day. One night, when the hospital was so quiet, you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Bob suddenly woke up. He saw Carol slumped over the edge of the bed, her hand still gripping his. He weakly nudged her. Carol jolted awake instantly. "Do you need something? Are you in pain?" she asked frantically, her exhausted face etched with worry. Bob shook his head slightly. He rallied the very last ounce of his life force to speak the words from the bottom of his soul. "Carol, can you help me sit up a bit?" Carol quickly adjusted the mechanical bed, propping pillows behind his back. She took a warm cloth and dabbed the sweat from his brow, her movements as gentle as a mother caring for a newborn. Bob looked deep into his wife's eyes. His cloudy, dying eyes suddenly sparked with a warm, clear light. "Carol," he called her name, his voice raspy but deliberate. "I'm sorry. I owe you an apology for the last 30 years. Carol froze, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. It was the very first time in 3 decades of marriage that she had heard a genuine apology from her husband. "Don't say that, Bob." "No, let me speak," Bob interrupted, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I was a terrible husband. I was selfish, petty, and greedy. I let money blind me. I let my calculations destroy our love. I made you suffer so much. You sacrificed your best years for me, and I treated you like an enemy." Bob paused to gasp for air, his chest heaving. "I know it's too late to fix anything, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for forgiving my cruelty. Deep down, I always loved you. I was just a fool." Carol's tears flowed like a broken dam. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. All the pain, all the repressed injustice of the decades, shattered with every sob. "I know, Bob. I know. I love you too." Bob raised a trembling hand and stroked his wife's hair. The warmth from her graying hair transferred to his hand, spreading through his freezing body. "That money," Bob whispered. "You have total control over it. Don't give it to Susan. She doesn't deserve it. Use it for your retirement, or do whatever you want with it. Consider it my compensation to you. I don't need the money, Bob. I just needed you to understand me. That's all." Carol looked up at him through her tears. "Rest easy. I will use that money in the most meaningful way possible, to build good karma for you." Bob smiled the most satisfied, peaceful smile of his entire life. He felt as light as a feather, the 1,000-pound burden gone. He had finally found true happiness, even if it was in the final seconds of his life. "I trust you. I trust you." His voice faded to a whisper, then slipped into total silence. His eyes slowly fluttered shut, and the hand stroking Carol's hair fell limp to his side. Robert Miller drifted into his eternal sleep, wrapped in the love and absolute forgiveness of his wife. Outside the window, dawn began to break. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, signaling the start of a new day. An ending that opened the door to a new beginning. Bob's funeral was dignified and intimate. Carol handled all the arrangements flawlessly, ensuring every detail was perfect. A large crowd of neighbors, old accounting colleagues, and friends attended, all praising Carol for being a devoted wife who honored her vows to the very end. Susan was there too. She wore black and wept bitterly. But this time, no one saw any fakeness in her tears. The death of her brother, combined with the profound lesson she learned from her sister-in-law, had truly awakened her conscience. After the funeral concluded, Carol invited Susan and Attorney Davis, the lawyer who had drafted Bob's will, back to the house to settle the estate. The atmosphere in the living room was solemn. Carol placed the blue Chase Bank passbook containing $500,000 onto the coffee table. Susan looked at the book, then at her sister-in-law, her eyes timid. "Carol, how do you want to handle this?" Susan asked nervously. Carol looked at the book, then spoke slowly. "According to the will, which Bob technically never revoked, though he expressed his desire to invalidate it in front of witnesses and Attorney Mitchell at the hospital, and according to state community property law, half of this money is legally mine. The other half is Bob's estate. Since we have no children, and both sets of our parents have passed, as the next of kin, you are entitled to a portion of his half." Susan immediately waved her hands frantically. "No. No, Carol. I absolutely cannot take it. Bob's dying wish was to give you full control. I legally renounce my right to inherit any of this estate. Please, keep all of it." Attorney Davis nodded in confirmation. "That is correct, Mrs. Miller. Susan has already signed a legal waiver renouncing her claim to the estate. The entirety of the $500,000 now legally belongs to you." Carol smiled, her eyes radiating kindness as she looked at her sister-in-law. She knew Susan had genuinely changed. "Thank you, Susan." but I have also made my decision. Carol pulled a different legal folder from her bag. I am not keeping this money for myself. I have my teacher's pension. The house is paid off. My needs are very simple. I have no use for $500,000. I have decided to take the entire $500,000 and establish a charitable foundation. It will be called the Times Robert J. Miller Cancer Support Foundation *. Susan and Attorney Davis sat in stunned silence. $500,000, a massive, life-changing fortune, and she was giving every single penny to charity, keeping absolutely nothing for herself. Carol. Are you serious? Susan stammered. I am. Carol nodded, with absolute conviction. Bob died from a horrific, painful disease. His final days were agony. I want to use the money he saved his entire life to help others in the same situation, poor patients who can't afford their medical bills. I believe that wherever Bob is now, he will smile and be proud of this. This is the absolute best way to give his life's work meaning, rather than letting it be the root of greed and division. Carol looked up at the framed photo of Bob resting on the mantel. In the photo, Bob was smiling a warm, gentle smile, a smile she hadn't seen in 30 years, until his dying breath. Death is the great equalizer. He is gone, and all the resentment and calculations have blown away with the wind. I want to preserve the best parts of who he was. This foundation will be the bridge that lets his love live on forever. Susan burst into tears, jumped up, and threw her arms around Carol. Carol, you are an incredible woman. I respect you so much. I promise, I will help you manage this foundation and make sure we honor his memory. Attorney Davis took off his glasses and wiped a tear from his eye. In his career, he had witnessed countless brutal, blood-and-tears legal wars over inheritances, but he had never seen such a beautiful, profoundly humane conclusion. Carol patted her sister-in-law's back, her soul feeling as light as a cloud. She looked out the window to the front yard, where the potted plants Bob used to tend were sprouting new green leaves. Life was continuing, and she knew she would live the rest of her days in absolute peace and happiness, carrying forward the love and forgiveness she had given entirely to her late husband. That concludes our story for today. If you found this story meaningful and want to hear more touching, profound tales, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.